Hi, and welcome back to Creative Chelsea. For today's video, I'd like to share with you some different techniques on how you can use your Stampin' Up! Stampin' Blend alcohol markers to create beautiful cards. So this is the card we're going to be creating today, and I've used 4 different techniques on this card. So the first thing that I've done is created a background, and this background is actually on vellum paper. So you're going to need a piece of vellum paper, and it's about 1/4 a page. So that would be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So grab some scrap paper, and I'm going to be using the Dark Night of Navy blend, as well as the color lifter for this technique. Now you could use any color blend marker, but I'm creating kind of a sky background, and so that's why I'm using these 2 markers together. So you're going to color on your vellum paper, and you're just going to keep things pretty even all the way down. I noticed when I was creating my background that if you do a lot of overlapping, then you're adding color, because the vellum has kind of like a gritty texture to it. It's not smooth. And so instead of it all being able to blend really well, you actually get some darker color in there. So just kind of evenly go down your paper. You'll see that what I mean by that spot right there. It doesn't really blend in. This is a really fun technique because vellum just kind of gives your projects a really soft feeling. And so by being able to add some color to them, it just really gives you some other options on how you can use vellum. Okay, so we've gone ahead and colored the whole background, and you can see that we do have some striping from that. And you're just going to have that. It doesn't go away. So on my other project, I tried doing a second layer, and I still got that striping. And if you look closely, you can see it. So the next thing we're going to do this paper, we're going to create some clouds, and we're going to use the color lifting pen to do that. You will also need a paper towel or napkin to help remove some of that color. So if you have any spots on your paper that you're not super happy with, then you can use this pen on those areas, and it kind of will blend that out. So we're just going to be creating some cloud shapes. So just kind of swirl around your paper, and then take your napkin or whatever, and you're going to remove the ink. Because what this is doing is it's kind of picking up that ink, and then you're going to pick it up and take it off your paper with a napkin. Now you'll see that you're coloring the tip here, but you'll just clean it in a minute. Let's do another one right here. And the nice thing about clouds is that they are very organic, so that doesn't need to be perfect. Let's do one right here. And I think that's probably good. Okay, so to remove the color from your color lifting pen, you're just going to rub that pen on some scrap paper until all the color comes off. And you'll want to make sure to get the tip as well. And you can see that that color will start to come off. There we go. So that might be stained slightly, but I don't think there's much color left. So there is our vellum, and we're going to be using this on the background of 3 different balloons. So we're going to go ahead and set this to the side. And the nice thing about using alcohol markers instead of ink is that this is totally dry and it doesn't rub off onto anything. When I have colored vellum before with like sponge daubers and ink, I'm always getting it on my fingers. So that's a good thing to use the alcohol markers for. So this was our technique number 1, coloring vellum. So for technique number 2, I'm going to show you how you can create gradients using the alcohol markers. Now, I would suggest keeping these gradients to a smaller area. If you're trying to create a gradient on a whole, for like a whole background, it's a little bit harder, but for a small section, such as these balloons, it works perfectly. So I'm going to do 3 different gradients, and I'm going to show you how to do that first. So instead of stamping first, I'm going to create the gradients, and then we will stamp and punch afterwards. So I'm going to grab the stamps, so like this one, and I'm just going to kind of outline with my light marker where that kind of color needs to be. So somewhere within that box, I should create my gradient. So the first step would be, for me, I take the dark color and I'm going to just go halfway with that dark color into that area I want to create the gradient. And then the next step would be to take the light color and just start bringing that light color all over. And I like to go different directions. Get a lot of ink on your paper. And then go ahead and you can come back. And this time don't quite go so far down. And then you're going to start blending in those colors right there. So you've got a light, a medium, and a dark. And you can just keep blending. I'm going to add just a little more dark down here, just to kind of fade it in a little bit. So I did that really lightly, just to create a little more fading effect. Okay, so that's a really good gradient. So we're going from a dark to a light, and now that side is ready for stamping. So let's go ahead and we're going to do the green one next. So we're going to kind of choose how big it needs to be. So we'll go about that. That big looks good. And for this gradient, we're going to do dark on the sides and light in the middle. So again, I like to start with my dark, and I'm just going to go about 1/3 into my section, and then on the other side about 1/3 as well. And then get that light and kind of just start blending it all in. And remember to go both directions. And then if you want, you can get a little more dark on the edges here. And then start to blend those all together. So the key with using Stampin' blends is to really put down a lot of ink. So if your markers are starting to not have as much ink in them, then you do need to probably purchase another set of inks. Okay, so I think that's a good gradient for my balloon. Yeah, good size. Okay, and so for our last one, we're going to do yellow. And again, I'm just going to measure. So it's probably about the same width, and that length looks good. So for this one, we're going to kind of do a similar gradient as the green, and we're just going to do dark on the top and dark on the bottom, and then light in the middle. So from the top, go down about 1/3 with your dark. And there's all different ways that you can use blends. Some people really like to start with the light color and then add that dark color on top of it. So it really is up to you how you want to use them. Okay, and that one blends super well. So I'm not even going to do, well, I'm going to go this direction. And then I think we're good. So the last thing we're going to do is just add some crumb cake, and this is for the baskets. And we're not going to do any gradients for those, but I do want a little section so that I can stamp on them. Okay, so now we're ready for the next step, which is stamping. Because we're using markers and I don't want any of the embossing powder to stick to the areas that are wet, I'm going to go over the whole page with my embossing buddy. And this just puts down a little layer of chalk. And that's just going to make sure that I don't get any embossing powder sticking to places that I don't want. So we are using the stamp set Above the Clouds and the coordinating punch. And I do love how this stamp set has a punch. So it's really easy to go ahead and cut those images out. So the first one we're going to do the yellow, and that has the scallops at the top. We're going to be using Versamark ink. So go ahead and ink up your balloon, and you're going to stamp that in the center of your area. And then I also wanted to add the little swoop of flags, like the banner. And so that I can kind of see my outline. So I'm just going to go ahead and stamp that in the center of the balloon. Okay, so I'm going to flip these, and I'm going to do the other balloon that is kind of separated into sections. So that one's going to go in the green. And then I'm going to stamp the one with the scallops at the top again in the Calypso Coral section. And then that one I'm not adding anything into the middle because we're going to add the greeting. So before I put embossing powder on these, I'm going to stamp 3 baskets in this crumb cake section. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and add the white embossing powder, and I just have a tray of it here. And I'm just going to shake it all over, tap off the excess, and then I'm going to heat this up with my heat tool. And I'm going to heat it up from underneath, and that's just going to keep the majority of the powder on the image instead of it being blown off before it melts. I love embossing powder. I just love how it adds a little special element to your cards. So once that's dried, we can punch out those images. So I always flip mine around so I can kind of see where I'm placing it in the punch. Okay, so this one's a little tricky with the baskets, so I'm going to actually need to cut them out a little bit more. And you just want to keep an eye on where those other shapes are cutting, because it's not just a punch for the basket. So it needs to come in at an angle, and you can see that if I was to punch this one, it would also cut that one. So it looks like I need to cut this top one first, or remove this top one. So you can just get creative, kind of cut out those ones that will be punched by accident, if that happens or not. Okay, so we've got one, and let's do this one next. Hopefully I can be able to place it in the right place. Okay, 2. And then we might need to cut this one as well. Okay. So go ahead and get rid of your extra pieces you don't need. And I love how the gradients work on those balloons. It just adds that little extra touch so that they look a little more three-dimensional instead of just a flat image. So that is technique number 2, learning how to do a gradient and using it for a stamp. So our technique number 3 would be to color accessories, such as ribbon or twine. And so what I've got here is the crinkled seam binding ribbon, and I'm going to cut 6 inches of this, and we're going to color it with the Daffodil Delight blend marker. And you could use the dark or the light color. I'm going to use the dark. So this is really easy. All you do is place it on some scrap paper, grab your marker you want, and then just run it down the side. Now, because there's a lot of ink that comes out, it does color both sides and you don't need to worry about that. I've noticed that if I am coloring like baker's twine, I will sometimes need to turn it over because it doesn't saturate the whole thing. So that's done. That was pretty easy. So that was technique number 3. And then technique number 4 is very similar. It's another accessory, and we're going to be coloring the rhinestones. Now this technique will also work for the pearls. And all you need to do is just get the color you want, and I'm using the dark Night of Navy, and you're just going to color over those accessories or the rhinestones. And it just colors the top. And the nice thing about the blends is they dry pretty instantly, and you're not going to get any color transfer on your fingers or your projects. Okay, so now that we have used our stamping blends and we have done all the coloring we need, we're going to just need to do a couple more things before we can assemble. And one of them is to cut out some cardstock. And we're going to do a frame, and we're going to do the greeting. So to cut out our cardstock, I'm using the rectangle stitched framelit dies, and I love these dies. There are so many that come in this pack. Let's see, there are 13, and I am using the second and third largest. So not the biggest, but the second and then the third. And the third is going to help us create that frame shape. But the first thing I need to do is cut my vellum down. So I'm just going to kind of line it up where I want, you know, those clouds to kind of be. And then I'm going to go ahead and run this through my Big Shot, and I will be right back. Okay, so I've cut that out. And the reason I did that is so that it's the exact same shape as the frame. And the reason I did that is so that it's the exact same size as the frame. So I've got that vellum paper. I'm gonna go ahead and remove this extra piece. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my frame. So I've got the inside piece with some tape, and I'm just going to kind of try to create an even spacing all the way around to create that frame shape, and then tape those two together. So then I'm going to grab a scrap piece of white cardstock, and we're going to go ahead and cut this out with the Big Shot. Okay, so go ahead and remove it, and you can save some of these extra pieces like this one for another card. And then remove your frame, and it's pretty delicate just because it's so thin. So just be careful. Great. So the next thing we need to do, we would need to add our balloons before we can add the top of the frame. So grab those, and 2 of them, the yellow and the green one, they actually are going to sit directly on the vellum. So just place those where you want them. And I'm just going to use, let's use some liquid adhesive so it doesn't come off. Just a little bit on the back. And I want this green one to kind of come off a little bit. so that way the frame will cover it slightly. And the same with the yellow. So I'm going to put the yellow between these two clouds with it just slightly coming off that edge. Let's go ahead and add 2 baskets. Just a little dab of glue. And I'm going to use my pickup tool. And then I'm just going to place that below my green one with a little space between the balloon and the basket. I really like how it just gives a little bit of space between the images, and it makes it look a little more real than adding it so that it's touching the basket. Okay, then this one will get added with some dimensionals. So I'm finishing up a sheet of dimensionals, and so I just clip the edge so I can get the most out of it. I'm going to put one at the top and one at the bottom. And this kind of goes between these other two, and you can place it maybe a little more straight vertically because these two are going at different directions. Make sure to leave a little bit of space at the bottom for the basket. Turn that over, add a little bit of glue. So this is not going to be popped up with a dimensional because it's sitting underneath the frame. And then just place that where you want it. Okay. So we've got our balloons on our vellum, and we're going to trim off any places that it comes off the vellum. So turn it over and just carefully use a pair of snips and trim your images. There's a little bit of that basket. There we go. Okay, next step would be to add our frame. So I've turned it over, and I'm going to add a little bit of liquid adhesive all the way around my frame. Just going to place some dots. Okay, lift that up, and then place that down over your vellum. So the nice thing about using liquid adhesive is that you can move it just slightly if you need to, if it didn't quite get in the right place. So just kind of line everything up. Okay, so we've gone ahead and added our frame, and it looks good. So the next thing we need to do, we're going to stamp the greeting. And there are some really fabulous greetings that go along with the stamp set. So we've got "Life is a beautiful ride," "Let your dreams soar," "We rise by lifting others," "You're off to great places," and "Hi friend." And so I really like this "Let your dreams soar." And so I'm going to stamp that on some Night of Navy cardstock. And I do want to remove the static from this cardstock, but it's a dark color. So I don't want to use the embossing buddy because it will leave a film over it, a chalky film. So I like to use a dryer sheet. And I'm just going to rub that over my whole paper. And then get the Versamark and the stamp, and then stamp that down. And then add your white embossing powder. And you can see how well that dryer sheet keeps the powder off of the cardstock. So I'm going to heat it up with the heat tool. So then I'm going to punch it out with one of the new punches that's in the January through June mini catalog. And this one's called the Label Me Fancy Punch. So this one, I'm not actually going to do any of the, I'm not cutting out any of the circle or the tag from the label. And so we can just fit this in nice and tight. It fits almost perfectly. Just make sure it's kind of evenly spaced. And then we're going to add the yellow ribbon that we colored to the back. So just take some snail and run it along the back. Fold your ribbon in half. We want the folded side to be on the at the beginning on the left side. So just make sure it's on the right side, and then you can flip it over. Then cut off your tails if they're a little too long. I like to use fabric scissors for this. I think it just gives me a nice clean edge. And then we're going to add this to our card. So let's add that after we add everything to our card base. So I've got some thick Whisper White Cardstock here, and it's my card base. It's just the normal size, so it was 5.5 by 8.5 and scored at 4 1/4. So we're going to add this with some dimensionals. The reason for that is so we can get that nice shiny look with the background. So light can kind of get underneath and kind of really give us that beautiful transparency of the vellum. So I'm going to be using some of the foam strips to kind of help it pop up. We don't want to place any adhesive along in the areas that are not being covered by something. So I'm just going to place these over the frame, and I'm just going to do some in the corners. So the whole idea is just where does it need the support so that it doesn't lay flat. So go ahead and center this on your card base. Just kind of lightly at first. Don't push it down, because when you bring it up to your eye, sometimes you will see that it needs adjusting. So I can see that it's turning a little bit to the left on the bottom here. And so I need to kind of adjust it for that. Okay, so once you have it where you want it, go ahead and add some pressure over those areas that you added the foam strips. And then we're going to add our greeting. So the greeting does need some dimensionals on the right side, but not on the left. So we can add some liquid adhesive or more snail to the left side, and then add some dimensionals to the right. Okay, and then that just goes over the balloon a little bit. So it's going to overlap the balloon and overlap the frame. There we go. So the last thing we're going to add are those rhinestones that we colored with the Night of Navy. I'm just going to place them one around each balloon. So I'm going to place one down here by the greeting, then one over here on this side by this balloon, and then the other down by this balloon. There we go. So our card is done. I hope you enjoyed learning this fun technique with me today and that you give it a try. Please subscribe, like, and share. Visit creativechelsea.com for a free tutorial of this project and to purchase the supplies needed. Have a creative day. Bye.